Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's live stream organized by JetBrains. No, not JetBrains. This is a Python Software Foundation PSF joint gig, and we're talking about Python 3.13 and emerging trends, a developer's guide to 2024. I'm Paul Everett, Python developer advocate at JetBrains. I'm hosting, along with three fabulous, brilliant experts. No expectation set up there. First, Dr. Tania Allard, Vice Chair of the PSF, Vice Chair, PSF Fellow, and QuantSight Labs Director. Welcome, Tania.
Hi, thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
We're bringing in the Vice Chair, Jodie. We got this. Next, Lukasz Langa, CPython developer in residence, Python 3.8 and 3.9 release manager. I'm sure you've gone through years of therapy to recover from that. Original creator of Black. Welcome, Lukasz.
Hi, happy to be here.
And we're going to get to Lukasz and flashing lights in a little bit later. We have a double doctor episode today. We have Dr. Tania. We also have Dr. Jodie. Dr. Jodie Burchell, data science and AI advocate, but not consultant here at JetBrains. Welcome, Jodie.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, the day I become an AI consultant, I think we know I'm just looking to cash into retirement.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's a very American thing for you to do.
That's right.
Before we get into the fun, how about we send a little love letter to the PSF? I just want us to talk a little bit about what the PSF has become, all the things that it's done, all the good it's doing in the world. Let's just pass the baton around a little bit. Tania, tell us a little bit about the PSF.
Oh, well, I'm of course very biased. I think the PSF is a fundamental part of our Python community. Like being where people are trying to continue to support and nurture this very big and diverse community through many initiatives. Of course, I spent a lot of time looking into PSF matters. So as I said, I'm very biased, but I think we do a lot for a small group of people. Um, One of the greatest things is start hiring developers in residence like Lukasz, which helps with a very critical part of keeping the language sustainable.
Lukasz, what you got?
Well, the PSF has been created to protect the trademark of Python, right? To make sure that it has a place online and in the real world, and it's not taken over by any single corporation or any other benevolent or malicious actor. And it has been doing this job for a long time, and it continues to do so. However, it's grown beyond that by gathering enough funds to fund not just me and Peter and Serhi, the developers residence right now, but plenty of other staff. So we have people dedicated to working on PyPI. We have a security developer in residence, and there is actually all the infrastructure that you use every day. Like when you think of Python, when you're installing something with pip install or maybe now UV pip install, right? This is all coming through PyPI, which is a gigantic operation run via the Python Software Foundation. So the director of infrastructure there, plus his employees now, I guess, his engineers now are doing a great job of making all of that actually be available, highly available, and tolerate ginormous need and kind of usage that we're getting out of it right now. Like some of the PyPI packages that we have published on there are just huge because all of this AI development requires a lot of binary drivers and so on and so on. So just we have exponential growth in terms of operational needs online, but also in real life. The PSF also sponsors a lot of local and international conferences, meetups, and workshops for its community members, including underrepresented groups. So I am very proud of being like a little part of that, since it is one of the few unambiguously kind of net positive places to work for.
On one of your points, I got to hang out with the folks from PyCon Africa in Python Africa at DjangoCon, and it's just such a wonderful thing. And Lauren was there on behalf of the PSF, and it was cool
Hi, Lauren.
seeing her do that. I know the ginormous, highly technical term you use, ginormous, but I love watching people's faces during keynotes when they see how many megabytes per month or gigabytes or terabytes or whatever you want to say PyPI ships out. Jodie, you got anything for the PSF?
Yeah, so I think I'm probably more of a newcomer to Python than the rest of you. I think what's been kind of extraordinary as I started in this job in particular is seeing how many things the PSF actually handles, and the amount of work that goes into each Python release is insane. Like reviewing all the PEPs, like controlling the community around that, the legal requirements and all of this. Like it's not just engineering work. There is a huge amount of social work that goes even to the technical aspects. And the fact that this is all open source and I don't know, it's a very, very special community. I feel really privileged to be part of it. And even though I'm not directly part of the PSF, I'm very grateful for the work.
It's weird to think next month is 30 years from the first Python meetup. Kind of weird. So we will get started with the first thing. We will start with Tania. And Jodie, well, no, I'll try and do this. As Tanya's talking, I will paste a link to the release notes, and I will also bring the release notes up. Tania, what do you have for Python 3.13 that captures your attention?
Well, there are a few things that I'm pretty excited about that I'm very, very happy to see. The first two are very, very close to user experience. Mostly having now an improved interactive interpreter and also improved error messages. And I put them in the bucket of user experience because this will basically help folks to get better debugging, like better understanding what is going wrong with their code and like what errors are encountering, but also the interactive interpreter. Also, Lukasz worked on that.
Yes.
Enables some keyboard shortcuts for activities like browsing, copying, and that is fundamental for accessibility. So for us to better serve our global and diverse community, that those are like big strides. And I am always excited when I see anything that focuses on user experience, accessibility. I am a major advocate for accessibility. And also making use of different affordances and queues, as I was saying, like to make your code more debuggable, more understandable. That helps everyone, from folks that are just getting started with Python to people that spend day in and day out in these areas as well. And of course, something that a lot of people are excited about, I'm also excited about, is the free threaded Python. Coming from the scientific Python world, like this has been a bottleneck for a lot of things, like from high performance computing workloads to even aligning as a community on APIs, on API decision, like standardizing how we're going to be accessing parallelism or avoid doing hacky bits to enable safe threaded operations. I think this is a huge improvement, a huge step forward for everyone in Python. I think, again, using my scientific Python hat, this is opening a big door for further development, performance improvements, and also better user experience in CPUs and GPUs in general.
All right. That's a lot already there. Let's talk about this a little bit. Those points, Jodie, Lukasz, you got any follow up on them?
Jodie?
So I was also going to talk about free threading for the exact same reason. So like, again, it's scientific community computing. There are so many memory intensive operations we do, like data processing. And obviously that's one of the reasons that Polars has become so popular, because of the safe concurrency that Rust can do. It allows parallelism. But even things like, I don't know, say you do grid search for hyperparameter search. That's a lot of different operations you need to do. So being able to parallelize that, obviously going to speed it up. So I was quite excited to see this coming out. And yeah, I think we've kind of fallen in love with that for the exact same reason.
Lukasz, what you got?
All right.
Let's follow up.
Well, how many hours do we have? I
This
can
is why
talk
I got
about
to go
this.
first.
I can talk about this forever because like both features that Tania mentioned like are very close to my heart. So the interactive interpreter is something I worked on with Pablo, Dino, Lissandros, and a bunch of other contributors. So the magical thing about it is that not only is it a better interactive interpreter, but it is written in Python. So it makes contributions to it significantly easier than it was before, when it was not only written in C, but also part of the parser. It was like a special parser mode. So you had to know not only C, but also this specific part of our code base. Now contributing to it is way easier because you're probably a Python user. So you probably can figure out like Python code. And many people did. So a lot of our contributions came from just, people showing up on sprints and so on. So that's amazing. I like this. And just to be clear, the most important feature of the new interactive interpreter is that you can just say exit and press enter and it will exit. That's a revolutionary feature. Scientists were not sure if this is achievable, but now like we proved that, yes, it is. We can in fact exit the interpreter without saying exit parentheses. Now you can skip the parentheses. So that's revolutionary. But joking aside, honestly, the multiline editing is probably something that people will notice the most, which is like a little thing. You can say it in 2 words, multiline editing, but it is such a change of quality in day-to-day life for the interactive interpreter that like now going back to Python 3.12, which is an awesome version of Python, just feels ancient to me for this reason. When I have to actually interact with it interactively, it's just a different era, like right away. So that one thing. Free threading has been a thing that people have been pondering for decades, literally, in Python. There were attempts to remove it, like that goes very long. And this current attempt to manage expectations is ongoing. What that means is like Sam Gross, the author of the PEP that describes how we can make the global interpreter lock optional, created this road to free-threaded Python that is necessarily incremental. What that means is currently, when you are going to download Python 3.13 next week, it is going to be a version with the global interpreter lock as previously. There is an experimental build that you can either make yourself, or maybe some Linux distribution is going to provide for you, or maybe you're going to find an installer on python.org, but it's experimental, which means you shouldn't rely on it for production workloads just yet. What we expect to happen is for library authors, for framework authors to pick it up right now and to figure out ways in which free threading can help them achieve better scaling and identify any issues that they might be having in the meantime. This is a huge change in the paradigm of how you program in Python. So this is not going to happen like in a matter of weeks, more in a matter of years, which is why currently end users should be excited. You can totally try this out. You can see how that works for you, but we do expect that at least for one release and possibly 2, it's the library authors, it's the framework authors that we are focusing on right now, because we want to hear from them. We want to serve them first, so that the end users in Python 3.14 or later can just pip install something new, like a new version of their favorite framework, and it automatically, or at least it supports scaling with free threading.
Another thing that Tania talked about on error messages, I just promoted your EuroPython keynote. I put a link in the channel. Everyone should watch it because it has music and flashing lights, and that's what we're all really about. But the entire keynote was in the REPL. actually for
Yes.
3.14. But you also got to see the cool error messages. And I have a question back to Tania for this, since you brought it up. Tell the audience a little bit more about kind of who did it, how the error messages became a focus, and what you think of the result.
Oh, that's me or that's Lukasz?
No, over
Let's do
to
that.
you, since it was your point. It's a great point.
Well, I don't really know how like the whole implementation of the of this revamped or improved error messages experience
Yeah.
happened. I think Lukasz probably.
Okay,
I'm not
cool.
sure if he was involved in that. He could probably talk about it.
Right. So I'm gonna tell a story that is entirely false, but since I am the one speaking, like nobody can stop me. So the real story about all those wonderful error messages started because of an auto formatter called Black. That auto formatter, I was very opinionated in how it formatted many things. And one of the things it doesn't like is backslashes. So it removed backslashes, and it removed them also from with statements that had multiple context manager as name elements in a single with statement. And I noticed that like actually in other elements, it is possible to use parentheses for grouping elements so that you can nicely then format them, because there's a parentheses pair, and now you can essentially nicely display them as if it's JSON essentially. This was impossible. So long story short, I nerd sniped Pablo Galindo Salgado to try to actually make this possible in Python, to have those parentheses in that particular place. And he quickly identified that it is fundamentally impossible. And the reason why was that the parser at the time that we used was limited in exactly that way, where it was too ambiguous for the parser to interpret what parentheses in that particular place meant. So long story short, and obviously like I'm just really overstating my role in this, like all of this snowballed into a new parser in Python. And that new parser is fantastic, allowed for things like the match statement that is essentially like soft keyword, right? You can still name your variables match, right? But like then you have the match statement. You can still name your variables case, but then you have case elements in those match statements and so on. So a very advanced parser. And one of the things that it allowed was for more advanced error messages, and like for better like specifying of error locations, which essentially not only tells you something went wrong, but tells you here exactly, not just on a line, but like here exactly in this column is where that none appeared that you didn't expect, and so on and so on. So yeah, like that's my story. I'm gonna stick to it.
It's one of those things that you're talking about, nicer error messages, and that's not exactly like landing a JIT. And yet the crowd went wild. Everyone just loved that. And it's kind of proof of where Python wants to be, which is something friendly and approachable. Tania, I think you had mentioned earlier about free threading. Lukasz did say, hey, there's consequences. You might want to keep an eye on this. Do you want to talk a little bit about how people can keep track of that?
Well, there is actually, like Lukasz mentioned, right now the focus is mostly on library maintainers, folks that are going to have to do some refactoring or so compatibility work and their APIs, libraries, tooling. So that, let's say, we can think about like our alpha users or our first adopters. There is a website, actually, Free Threading, where some of my colleagues and friends are actually keeping track on which big libraries and frameworks in the Python world are actively working towards this compatibility with free threading Python. Surely the link will appear there. So
Yeah, I
if
just
you're
put the link
interested
in
in
the chat.
there, you can keep track. You can see libraries like SciPy, NumPy already there, CI build wheels. As this becomes, well, as the releases go out, you're going to see a lot more adoption, and that's a good place to keep track of where's your favorite library lands.
I'm glad those folks are doing it, because we really, really have to work hard to bring people over to the other side of the mountain on this. It's going to have a little bit of pain. Lukasz, did you have anything else about Python 3.13?
It has another wonderful feature that is also experimental and recently like sort of improved from being 0% slower to being 0% faster. What I mean is the just-in-time compiler that we are working on, and by we, I mean Brand and a couple of other core developers. I am not involved in that, at least not yet. So how do I explain what is happening? Okay, so a few years back when I started being a release manager, I noticed that the releases are sort of scattered all over the place. Like in theory, they should be every 18 months, but they were anywhere between 18 and 24 months. You couldn't expect when that's going to happen. They were rather large because if you get a release every 2 years, like there's going to be a big jump you have to do in compatibility wise as a user, and so on and so on. So my idea, supported by some Linux distributions, was that let's do an annual release cycle and just release predictably in October of every year. And this is what we have been doing since. But that creates a problem. If you have a major feature to develop, like removing the Go-under lock or introducing a just-in-time compiler, it's just not feasible to make this change in a 12-month time frame, out of which a decent chunk is just a beta and release candidate stage where you are only fixing bugs and not actually working on functionality. So how do we approach this? For large features like that, there is sort of incremental presence of a feature. And the just-in-time compiler is a perfect example of this, where, again, you can build your own Python 3.13 that will include the just-in-time compiler. At this point, this functionality is there, but it doesn't have much in terms of optimizations that make just-in-time compilation actually faster than interpreting your code. In fact, there is some scaffolding that you have to have and some runtime costs to just having just-time compilation. So whether it sounds impressive to you that we achieved 0% slower, in fact, like that is already an achievement because that functionality is already paying for itself. But now is the time to actually introduce performance improvements in that. So like a ton of little optimizations, maybe a few bigger ones. This is going to be the subject of Python 3.14, possibly later versions as well. So currently, you have the JIT in Python if you compile it yourself. However, you shouldn't expect a dramatic change in performance. In fact, if you look at the PyPy history, so an alternative interpreter of Python that has a very effective just-in-time compiler, it's been a project that has taken years to get to where it is in terms of efficiency. So we are sort of retreading some of those steps. However, it is feasibly, like, it is just impossible to just make Python change from 0 JIT to 100% JIT in a span of 12 months. So this is a very foundational moment for us. But as an end user, you'll probably be much more excited about it a release or two from now.
Before handing over to Jodie, we'll take some questions and points from the audience. But just to close that point out, at PyCon US, there was a talk from the person leading the JIT effort. Lukasz, do you want to talk about the cool story there?
Right. So the person leading the JIT effort is Brand Booker. I'm not quite sure what particular part of the story you want to bring up there, but
the two university students that are working on it.
Right. Yes.
That's the talk I'm referring to.
Oh, right. So one of them being Ken Jin, is that the talk?
Yeah.
Right. So we do have a core developer in our ranks, Ken Jin. He started first contributing to typing and then quickly moved on to performance topics. He lives in Singapore, at least so far. I actually visited him there, which he was a wonderful host, showed me around. So he is indeed a real person and contributes to Python like incredibly well, like by, also just being almost as young as my son. So I'm very impressed. The particular work that Ken Jin is focusing on, like alongside the other student, and I'm very sorry, like not to recall her name now. I have not had the opportunity to meet her. So they are working on optimizations that will allow the JIT compiler to be to emit faster code. The examples that they were giving were like when you have different parts of the code with the opcodes checking, for example, if something is not none. Then within a longer trace that we combine together, we can see that we're just constantly checking for the same variable to be none. So we can just move this check to be just done once at the start of the trace. And some of the other larger scale optimizations like unwinding loops and so on are things that they are looking into right now. So yeah, this was very impressive for young people who I don't know, like I want to say like didn't have like as much experience as the others, but I guess like this is already this next generation of core developers. I remember being like the new guys, in core development, and now we noticed last year and to some extent this year too at the core developer sprint that like there's an entire cohort of core developers that are hanging out with each other because they're like literally another generation of humans, and we are no longer the young guys. We are no longer the new guys. So it is fantastic to see that we're growing as a group of core developers. And Kenjin is one of the most impressive ones. I like the guy, and I really like to see like what he is contributing.
For the record, I have no comment on younger generation. I'll just skip that part. But when he gets up there and says, I was an undergraduate, I had some time on my hands, so I wrote a JIT. I'm like, what did I do in college? I didn't
They
do
are,
that.
yeah, they're incredibly talented. The other student
Yes.
is Jules.
Great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so Jules was actually interning with us at Labs, and Kenjin has been working with us for a while. They're incredibly talented, just
Yeah.
like, yeah, super
And they fit
inspiring,
right
super
in with
lovely
the
people.
rest of us, which is not always easy to do. We're kind of weird. All right, onward. Let's pop up some things. So we got a number on how much traffic PyPI has delivered. Thank you, Mike, for sharing that with us. This was chiming in after E brought up the point that you just got to choose the right unit of measurement. Keith wanted to reinforce the point. Much agreed. At PyCon US as well, when Jay gets up and gives his talk, I got choked up a little. I admit it. Gotta have some obligatory love for Black and its creator. Yay. Keith also points out about the parser and about MicroPython. It's a good point. Some of these other implementations might not get all of the things that you hear today or might get them later. But I will say, if you get to around the 8-minute mark of Lukasz's EuroPython keynote, you'll hear him talk about the parser gods. So it's just which gods you choose to follow. And then finally, this is a question. I'll pose it to both of you. If you have anything, let's make it quick on the reply, though. Who's the first target audience for production free threading?
Well, anyone, well, like Jody pointed out before, anything that has to do like very heavy computational work. So we're going to see folks in the arena of deep learning that is like using free threading. As soon as like folks like NumPy, SciPy, PyTorch, they are going to start adopting that. That will translate right away into those commercial production adopters, really.
Good answer. And since you invoked the name of Jodie, we will switch over to Jodie. What do you have for 313 that interests you?
Yeah, so maybe a somewhat unusual one, but I think the new suite of functions for PEP 669, so monitoring events, really like anything to do with improvements for debugging or monitoring observability. This is always super useful, and it's obviously not the most glamorous part of development. It's not like the sexy stuff that you can see. So anything that makes it a bit less memory heavy, anything that makes it a bit more granular, that makes it easier to do that, actually really cool. And Paul, we have some stuff in PyCharm actually to help out with that, right?
Yeah, we got there first. Shout out to Andre on the team for getting the debugger to use. We just kind of detect if you're in 312, we detect that you support faster sys monitoring stuff, and we just kind of turn it on by default. I'm really interested in this future. You see Ned with coverage looking at low impact monitoring, some of the other tooling looking at low impact monitoring. Lukasz, you have a tool. Some people use it, a couple at least, called Black. Do you have a position on where Python tooling is going with some of this work?
I just want Charlie to re-implement all of it, so I don't have to maintain any of it. So, like, I very much support like
That's a boss move.
the rise of UV. I like ruff. I never opposed the ruff formatter, and I'm pretty happy that like it essentially arrives at roughly the same style as Black is using. The tooling essentially is there to just help people and get out of the way. Black was always contentious because people just deciding to adopt it was that where that point of contention moved. Later on, the tool was just doing its job, and you could just have some contempt for it, like not doing everything that you would do manually, but it was automatic, so it was faster, so we accepted it. But that's just a very small part of the user experience for a Python developer. What Astral is doing currently is just kind of incredible in the sense of how broad they're approaching the tooling landscape of Python. When they first started with ruff, I was like, yeah, okay, cool, like we actually need a faster Flake 8, I guess. And I was happy that I have a plugin for Flake 8 that I wrote, and it's now maintained by a team of people, and essentially those warnings were just added to ruff like by default. So I was like, oh, okay, cool, I like that. But then they branched out to just, let's just solve Python packaging, by the way, just while doing that thing. And let's just do all the formatting because that's easy. And now Carl Meyer and Alex Waygood are working at Astral to write a type checker, because obviously that's another project that you can just write in a year and so on. So like I'm being cheeky, but like they're being just incredibly successful at like delivering. So I am like just honestly just very interested in where that is going to take us. Like if I can be like a little bit I don't know, philosophical right now, I do see a new challenge that we didn't have before, in that all of this tooling is written in Rust, which obviously has this kind of aura of performance in it and so on, but it actually moves the tooling for Python from Python, which means an avenue that existed before for you learning about Python, and by looking what those tools are doing is sort of slowly going away. And I just wonder like how this is going to impact people who are learning Python today or like in 5 years. But for the end user, the tools themselves, they seem excellent and just getting better. So I'm very excited about that. But just to be clear, just to finish on one thought, Black is not being deprecated, it's not being removed, it's not being replaced. In fact, ever since ruff added the ruff formatter, we've actually seen growth in terms of downloads. So it just seems like the cake of all the formatting is growing. So whether we have like the whole slice, like or like part of the slice, doesn't really matter. It just seems like people are warming up to the entire idea.
And just to reinforce your point, Tanya said it, you said it. A key feature of the REPL isn't just how pretty it is, but that it's written in Python. And so that brings it within the hands of some contributors or whatever. Okay, we will close out the Python 3.13 part with one more comment from the audience. You do see things in PEP land that kind of talk about garbage collection. Do either one of you want to talk about that? Lukasz, are you closer to this?
I just returned from Bellevue, Washington, when we were working on the garbage collector as well, which was briefly set to be replaced by an incremental garbage collector, which what that means is it's doing a little more job overall, but it's doing it in little slices, which means pauses for garbage collection should be smaller. So real-time applications, which seems like a good fit for free threading, would benefit from that. In practice, very late in the game, we found particular regression in performance, specifically in Sphinx, in how it generates some artifacts. Like in that case, that was diagnosed to be due to the change of the JIT, the garbage collector. So that was reverted for now. So 3.13 will still ship with the garbage collector that we have known before, just because we're not confident that the overall performance level will not regress. And that regression was sort of limited, but rather significant. So we had to make sure that people are not affected. But that does not mean the kind of the fight for incremental garbage collection is over. Interestingly, Neil Schemenauer, who was the initial contributor of garbage collection to Python, all those years ago, is still an active core contributor and was there with us in Bellevue. And garbage collection is still the area that he is very interested in. And so he spent the week on potential improvements in that area. And after the sprint, we actually recorded a bunch of interviews with people who were there, and Neil is one of those. So instead of me badly interpreting what he said, I can just maybe direct you at the Core.py podcast that I'm one of the hosts of, that includes 20 plus people from the core developer sprint in Bellevue, talking in their own words on what they were working on there in Bellevue at Meta. And Neil was very much focused on the garbage collector at that point.
Okay, wrapping up on the garbage collector, if I remember correctly, Mark Shannon, as part of 7 years ago when he started staring at Python performance quite deeply, has been deeply involved in that. I should add that this questioner is someone whose blog I've read religiously over the years, Nikita Sobolev.
Sobolev, yes.
Yep. And kindred types and type classes and all kinds of weird Python type theory ideas that I'm not qualified to understand. And so I would always—
And that core developer.
Yes. Okay. There you go. There you go. Okay. Let's switch over a little bit. We have an audience that may not play the inside game so much and know how everything happens. Let's talk a little bit about Python releases in the PSF. One of the nice things about being the host of this is I get to choose the questions. So I just arbitrarily decided I've got the vice chair of the PSF here and a former release manager. We're going to reveal the curtain a little bit and talk about Python releases. I'll start a little bit with Tanya. And I'm going to ask kind of as a weird question. Everybody knows that the PSF is in charge of the development of Python and Python releases, right?
False. That is just not true at all. I think, like Lukasz mentioned at the very beginning, a big part of what the PSF does is trademarking, ensuring that a trademark is preserved. like keeping all of that fantastic infrastructure alive. But what goes into the Python language, into releases, that is entirely a core dev business and a steering council business. So that's where we have the separation of responsibilities, where who does what. Um, so yeah, we have nothing to do at all. Like we have an amazing team of core devs that do all of that. All
Would
that
you
incredible.
describe it a little bit of separation of church and state, that the PSF stays in the organization of the world of Python, not the development of Python?
Right. So yeah, Python core development has always remained within the steering council now. There is a 5-person council since Guido stopped being our BDFL.
Mhm.
And the whole process and the whole governance is defined PEP 13. I want to say yes, PEP 13. Which describes the responsibilities of this steering council, how people join in there. I think in terms of relationship between the core team and the steering council and the PSF, our executive director, Dev, she might be around here, hey, is almost like a liaison between these two groups. So she is constantly in touch with the steering council, has like some sort of advisory role, ensures that they meet consistently like every few weeks. The PSF also provides financial support and like organizational structural support to some core Python activities, like all Discord sprint that Lukasz was mentioning, that like PSF and our fabulous controller Phyllis helps with a lot of expenses, organizational things, logistics, all of that to make sure that that happens. Also, all the infrastructure used by for Python development. E, our wonderful hero, that takes care of that, like make sure that that is there for when we need it, like to make releases, to take care of the Python packaging indexes. Sponsorship, we're talking to our sponsors so that we can also, well, so that they can also finance positions like the security in residence person, developer in residence, and so forth. And design decisions, release decisions, PIPs shepherding, that is core folks and the steering council, really. So that's how the separation works in reality.
It has been a crazy 6 or so. Lukasz, when did you become developer in residence?
Oh, that was a different era. Like it was in 2021. So I just started my well, like what is it? It's the 4th year, right? I've been the core developer in residence for 3 years now. Now I'm into my 4th one. It is very strange to see how far Python has changed in that time. And at the time, I was the single one, and now there's 3 of us. Hopefully, there's going to be more. That depends on corporate sponsors. I'm very happy to be sponsored by Meta. Peter is sponsored by Bloomberg, and Sergey has an individual anonymous sponsor. So, like, that is very generous. Like, we definitely would love to see more of that sort of like, you know, funding coming from corporations that are users of Python, that allow us to be essentially the janitors of Python. It sounds weird, but
Totally
it is a
agree.
very important role, because you have to believe me, like I was visiting Carl Meyer in his magnificent house in Bellevue, Washington, that is overlooking the bay, like, you know, and his deck is so high above the street level that like you just feel like you're in a forest with a lake view or something. Like, you don't know it's a bay, like from where he is, but you are in the middle of Bellevue essentially. So I'm right there, and like, what would you like to spend time on? Would you like to spend time on recovering your data for an entire day from Heroku that just destroyed your database with a migration that went wrong? Like, probably not. And if I were a volunteer, spending a day on that would feel incredibly frustrating. I would be like, you know, why am I doing this? This is not fun. This is not the programming language I came here for.
Sure.
But if it's a paid role, if it's something that is just part of your responsibilities, you hunker down, you just accept that this is your task for the day, you do it, and the rest of core developers can just be unblocked with this. They can just assume that this part of the project is just working fine without them having to actually push it forward every now and again when it fails. And that's the magic of sponsorship, that it really changes your emotional sort of interpretation of the same events.
But you also become a
really,
multiplier because you review pull requests, and
I do, yes.
And so I think back to what Tania was saying and the role of the PSF, and it all kicked off with a visionary sponsor. I believe that was what got Lukasz in the game. Was it Google, or
Right.
was Google PyPI?
This was initially the first year of my sponsorship was Google. Then it was taken over by Meta, and they haven't let go since. So I'm very grateful for that.
Okay, Lukasz, just a couple minutes. Talk a little bit about, we're talking about the 3.13 release. You have an unfortunately intimate relationship with the history of Python releases. Just tell people a little behind the scenes. How do these things actually get scheduled? Decisions made about what to back out of, such as what you just mentioned. What's the process?
Right. Every release manager has the last say on what has to be reverted, but over the past 10, 15 years, we've been pretty consistent at how we approach what is stable enough to actually end up in a release. So just to take like a bird's eye view on this, the release schedule is for one release of Python, which is going to be alive for 5 years. That 5 years starts with some like alphas that we don't really count towards the release being out. We start counting from the final release in October. So alpha starts somewhere early, like just after the previous release was released. So for example, now 3.13 is going to go out on Tuesday or so. And Hugo van Kemenade, who is the release manager of Python 3.14, is going to release the first alpha like a week later, right? October 15th. Those numbered releases just allow us to easily number when regression was introduced and later fixed. Alphas are really the active period of functionality being added to Python. Smaller functionality is being tracked by issues. So you just describe what you're trying to add, and then a bunch of pull requests make it happen. Larger changes to Python require a so-called Python enhancement proposal, a PEP, which is a numbered document where you present the design for your change and discuss how alternatives were considered but rejected, and so on and so on. People discuss whether that PEP is in the right state to actually be presented to the steering council to decide on. And then the steering council rejects or accepts your PEP. And in the latter case, it becomes implemented, right? Which means somebody has to hunker down and make that implementation happen, which includes the code, but also the tests and the docs, so that people can actually utilize your new fantastic feature. And all of this has to happen before someday in May, where we decide it's time for beta. And beta 1 is the cutoff where we are no longer adding new features. We're focusing now on stabilizing the release, which means fixing bugs and possibly reverting changes that we identified were too, incomplete or presented too many issues to end users. So this time is specifically for users to play with a new version of Python and identify those problems. So if I can just have one thing for you to remember from this stream, is that betas are really there for you. You should just play with them for a bit. I don't require you to go through weeks of mandated testing, just some automated pipelines and so on. If you can do that, amazing. But if any user could just test out a little how they use Python, whether that still works in the newer version, that will ensure that the final version that we arrive at in October is the most stable possible. So that is extremely important. Somewhere in summer, we reached the release candidate stage, which we realistically already planned for 2 of those. Ideally, release candidate 2 should be identical to the final release because it's a release candidate. This time around, we were working at the core sprint in Bellevue, and there were so many fixes that were last minute that the release manager, Thomas Wouters, decided that the state of release candidate 2 is too far from the state of the final release. So he made a decision to also release a final, hopefully, release candidate 3. And that happened early this week with me working on Windows installers from New Brunswick over Starlink. So that was fantastic. And yeah, and next week we're going to get the final release of Python 3.13.
Definitely encourage people to consume these before finals. There are so many ways now to make that a lot easier to get, like indie Greg builds or whatever. Tanya, do you have any closing remarks you want to make about the PEP process or anything? Jodie?
I'm just going to say is there is just so much work done at this social infrastructure that often gets overlooked. Just like ensuring that these PEPs are not stalled, like keep moving them. Sometimes just like refocusing the discussions, like aligning users' needs with what is possible in the implementation side. And sometimes just like once a PEP is accepted, once it gets to the part, and okay, so who's gonna do it? Like there is so much work, like what we sometimes refer to as glue work that goes into what Python is, what Python release is, that is just as important, is as fundamental as the actual code that goes into it to make all of this happen. And having people working on this full time, being that multiplier, that unblocker, that shepherd is really, really fundamental for the whole sustainability and keeping the wheels of the releases and the whole Python language working really.
Yeah, you make a good point. One of my heroes, Brett Cannon, came up with the come for the language, stay for the community. And Python isn't the only hero of the story. The PSF itself is a wonderful achievement now for humanity because Python is so big. And the PEP process itself, which has been going on for a very long time now, has been copied by other programming languages. This is a cool thing. And you're right about discussion. I'm involved in a PEP that's going through discussion, and people had opinions. So get involved and give your comments. We will switch over to the developer survey part of this and then get into a wrap up. And what we'll do is we'll kind of go through some of the things in the developer survey. And this is it, the developer survey results from 2023. And talk about some of the things that kind of stand out to us. Hey, Jodie, I know that this is flipping the script a little bit. I should have asked you. Should have asked you. You want to go first with Tanya?
We can do that.
All right, cool.
So I have some questions for Tanya because she is an absolute wealth of knowledge, and I'm going to take this opportunity to pick your brain. So I need to scroll down to the correct part of the script now. Thanks, Paul.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm in charge of the screen, so I'm your remote control. Where do you want to go?
I'm here. I'm good.
Right.
Okay, so let's pop down to the data science section. And one of the things that jumped out to me, Tanya, when I was looking through the survey is basically I was comparing 2022 to 2023. So the number of users, or the proportion of the Python user base that said they were involved in data science or machine learning actually went down. So 51% of people reported that they were doing data science or machine learning in 2022, and only 44% last year. So obviously for me, my whole life is like data science. This is like the little bubble I'm in. So it seems kind of weird to me, right? That our user base has gone down as a proportion. But like, do you have any thoughts on this? Like, is it that maybe we're splitting off into different types of titles and it's not just data science anymore?
I think so, right? Like we've all heard about LLMs, right? And with that,
Yeah.
like people have moved into other roles. I think like a few years, there were so many flavors of data scientists, of like what we would call a data scientist, because we were still figuring out as an industry what that even meant. So I think we are
Mhm.
at another point where people are shifting titles. I also noticed this is the first year that you have something like MLOps and data engineering, because they have become like more established roles, better defined roles into our industry. So probably folks also are like, oh, actually, I feel like I identify myself more like an MLOps person and less as a machine learning person or a data scientist person. But as I said, like with this like growth in LLMs, I don't think we're going to see much of a drop on folks that are working in that space of Python, really.
Yeah, like it feels like it's growing, but I agree with you. Like it feels like it's fragmented more. Like it's not the field it was when I started, and it's probably not the field it was when you started. No,
It's so
no.
different. So
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. And actually that is kind of a segue into my next question, which is I feel like looking at the survey results, you can see that fragmentation in a lot of ways. And it's not just in terms of the job titles, but it's the maturity of the tooling system we have now. So like one obvious thing was I started in 2016. Like PyTorch, TensorFlow, Keras, that stuff either hadn't been released or had just come out. And now that is mainstream. It's healthy, it's well developed. So like obviously you have a lot of experience on the ML ops side of things. So what sort of maturity or changes have you seen in the system, and what what things have changed, like stayed the same for you?
Oh wow. To
Big
say,
question.
well, she's like so long, right? If I think about,
Mhm.
please don't make that many maths, but like 2009, 2010 to now, it's just a whole different thing, right? So something that has remained the same, you see the usual suspects now, like SciPy, NumPy, Pandas, being still the default libraries and tools that we have, and they're there year after year. NumPy is like one of the most downloaded libraries in the Python ecosystem. It's incredible. Um, those are the same. We still see the usual suspects of Jupyter notebooks as well, like being
Mhm.
used in different contexts. Anaconda, well, Conda being used as well. So that part is stable, and I think like scikit-learn is incredibly stable as an API and a library, and that's one of the reasons why I love it, and I know a lot of people love it, because it's boring in a good way, in a perfect
Yes.
way. Like you don't have to worry. I don't have to worry about my things breaking. Um, new things, I think like PyTorch has been consolidating its ground year after year after year. The MLOps space has exploded. Like every month, every week, sometimes there is a new tool, a new thing, like in the MLOps space. Um,
Mm.
I think sometimes there there is too much variety. There are like too many things. Like a lot of tools that do one thing, and then other tools that try and do everything across the entire life cycle. But you are starting to see some of those making it around year and year, meaning that they are remaining, they're consolidating, they're making themselves more robust. Um, I think this year, is it this year, TensorBoard or last year,
Mm.
like went deprecated. So I wonder those users where they're going. We've seen shift from people that were using probably TensorFlow going to other libraries. Now we have another big player, JAX, coming in the space. So I see like
Yep.
that's constantly evolving, um, constantly changing.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. So I'm involved with Humble Data, which is a beginner's data workshop. Maybe I should try and recruit you for that. Chuck recruited me, so we just
Oh,
kind of grab
Chuck is
everyone.
a friend of mine.
Yeah. But basically, we get people in this workshop that a lot of them are career changers. They want to get into data science, and they get super overwhelmed because they're like, "Oh my god, do I need to know all this stuff about LLMs and blah blah blah?" And the interesting thing is you look at this survey result and it really confirms what you see when you're working on the ground as a data scientist, which is, I think, honestly, 60, 80% of us are still just doing stuff that will fit on your local machine, especially as machines grow bigger.
Mm.
Probably CSVs, maybe some relational databases, Jupyter notebooks, maybe scikit-learn if you're feeling fancy. It's not like a lot of this cutting edge stuff. It's still experimental. It still has very specific domains.
Jodie, does this stat reinforce what you're saying about
Anyway,
big
let me have a
data?
look. Yes, exactly. And like I have a little blurb. It's like weird quoting myself because I have myself on the survey. But my interpretation of that as well is big data has always been a super vague term. I actually looked up some stats for this, and apparently the amount of data that's been produced has increased 10 times in the last 10 years or so. But then our computational capabilities have also grown. So what's big data, right? It used to be, does it fit on my local machine? Maybe that's still the definition. I don't know. All right, I have one more question for you. And this is about machine learning because, of course, it is. So if we scroll down to, I think it's about the machine learning libraries question. Wait a minute. Yeah, if you can find scikit-learn, the one where it says, no. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Here.
that one there. Perfect. Cool. So basically the finding from this one is you can see like a pretty healthy split between machine learning and deep learning. So I know I just said most people are doing machine learning, so maybe I gave away my point of view. But what's your point of view on this? Like, do you think a lot of people are using machine learning in production versus deep learning, or do you think it's more experimentation? Like, what do you reckon is actually getting deployed?
That is an interesting question because I think deployment, like even now, like that step from R&D to deployment or to production continues to be a battle, right? And
Yep.
as our field evolves, as LLMs have come around, like that, those also bring a different set of challenges. So that continues to be a challenge. I think traditional machine learning is still, well, traditional, I think it's still a big portion of what folks do. Um, we're definitely going to be seeing, similar to how we were seeing that explosion to MLOps, I think we're going to be seeing an explosion of LLM specific tooling, like to work with and to build applications or integrate with existing applications in the next years, really. Because we're only starting to scratch the surface. And I think a lot of people are still in the very early exploration phases of what is even what is possible with an LLM. And while we figure it out, while we figure, okay, this is where they really add value, and this is how we make it accessible to folks, we're going to start seeing a similar explosion in that arena. But you see also, you see, I think in that, yes, it is there. You start seeing Hugging Face transformers in there as well. Then there lower down, there is something about how are people using machine learning or something in production or platforms. Also, Hugging Face spaces are there, or Hugging Face are there. So it's very interesting to see how the whole landscape is changing, because that this is also targeted towards LMs, is targeted towards more creating more accessible tooling for folks. Because still the cloud, uh, like folks seem to be using a lot of cloud containers for production, for machine learning, but seeing uh, smaller players in a sense like Hugging Face, that it's only a few years old now, being present in and having a stronghold in the machine learning space is fantastic, I think. And they've been doing a really good job at democratizing and making tooling and platform and content accessible to folks, and that shows.
Yep. This is my point where I do a shout out to one of my all-time favorite courses, which is Hugging Face's NLP course. I'll paste it into the chat. But talking about democratization, like it's not just the tooling, it's not just making the models available, it's making it all interpretable, even if you obviously need to have a bit of a background in deep learning to understand it. But even with that, like basic understanding of Keras, you can understand how to jump to transformers. So yeah, I agree with you. It's it's exciting. It's a little bit still a bit too hypey for my taste. I am waiting until next year to see what happens, but we will see. We will see. Good time for natural language processing, that's for sure.
I will say it was fun having Hugging Face hang out with us at EuroPython last year, and they've got quite a crowd that just loves them. So,
And for good reason.
and for good reason. I'll follow up on Tania's point about how much things are changing with LLMs. I've just outsourced all of my thinking to Simon Willison, who is happy to go out there and write 27 times a day about everything I should be thinking about. Let's pop up some questions. I was behind a little bit. Tania, first one's for you, and then we will get to Lukasz and get out of here. Hey, Tania, the mention about university students helping in development. Any point on this?
Well, the PSF or a core team doesn't have a proper internship program per se. This internship where Jules was at Quantum Labs, our company,
Got it.
and she was working directly on CPython. Kenjin was actually one of her mentors, but we also have Lisandro's around. So we have a group of mentors, a group of core developers in labs, and we run our yearly open source internship. That's how she came around. But if I remember correctly, Python participates in other initiatives like Google Summer of Code. I think
Okay.
it has been doing that for a few years. Those are other opportunities. Over there. I don't know, Lukasz, do you have any other insights, pointers? I don't think there is anything super established right now in that sense.
Yeah.
Next point is actually based on what both of you were saying about so many things that people don't see about how releases happen and how much work and so many things to consider in so many places. So again, shout out to the PSF for being able to do this so well for so long. This is a question about the survey reach. I'm going to flash it up for a second as a reminder to all of us helping on the survey that maybe we can explain a little bit more about the methodology. I won't get into it too much. What I will instead is ask Lukasz 2 questions from the survey and see if he was surprised the way I was, because this stuff is really more in his area. In the survey, it says, will I be able to think and talk at the same time? That Linux for developers is almost double Mac. I was surprised by that. Lukasz, does that surprise you?
Not really. MacBook Pros are, in my mind, the best laptops currently that you can buy. I'm still like in love with mine from 2021 and have like zero will to upgrade because they're just so good. The ARM Macs are fantastic. However, they are not really a deployment target in the sense that people don't run their servers on Mac OS. They run it on Linux. Most Mac OS developers do use Docker at some point in their development cycle. And those images are all Linux. So it makes perfect sense that some developers would just choose to just run on Linux.
I guess
themselves.
WSL is the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a Windows developer using WSL reports themselves as perhaps being Linux. I don't know. It's a good question. I wonder if they think they're a Windows developer or a Linux developer.
So sometimes they would actually report to us bugs saying like on Ubuntu something is happening, and then you would learn that actually it's Ubuntu on WSL, which is slightly more of a curveball for us.
You left the major part of the plot out on that bug report. Okay, this one, I wonder both your opinion of it now and your opinion of it back in the day. 75% of people are on a fairly recent Python version. Does that seem high or low? And how would you gauge that versus 3.8 timeframe?
Right. I'm happy to see that people are, in fact, moving towards newer versions. The rate at which they're doing so is sort of their own, deliberation. The entire point of annual releases is that it should be easier to upgrade to any of them, like from the previous one. And it is a pretty popular approach these days that people would just skip a release and upgrade every 2 years or so. So you would see the versions that are still maintained by us, at least for security bug fixes, to be rather popular on servers, popular with users of PyPI, where you can see like which versions of Python are used to download packages. Would we like more people to adopt newer versions faster? Of course. But if you compare the big rift between Python 2.7 and Python 3, clearly this is not a problem anymore. We are much more incremental in changes that require user action to upgrade. So like there are still compatibility breaking changes. Many of them are just removing legacy deprecated code and so on. And some changes just are required to enable all those cool features that we were just talking about in the first part of this stream. But all in all, this looks healthy to me.
Yeah, people that might be wondering about that, it could be worse. It could be the Python 2 versus Python 3 timeframe. So be thankful for what you have. I will break the rules and put in to answer this from Mike. As it turns out, I know the answer, which is such an infrequent occurrence that I will highlight it. Here's the survey answer about team size, which also surprised me a little bit. And you can find out some more demographic information such as company size and age range. I used to joke that 101% of Python developers started yesterday. We might be getting out of that trend a little bit. What I will do now is say the 2 best words in any presentation in conclusion. We will start to do a little bit of a wrap up. Normally I close with, thank you all for joining, more information on PyCharm, but this is a PSF jam. So we've covered a lot. It's an exciting time in the world of Python. Closing comments for everybody. Tania, let's start with you. Let's talk about people that are watching. What's one thing you would want them to walk away thinking about for Python this year and beyond?
Oh, about Python itself?
The world of Python, yeah.
The world of Python. I would like you to, well, people to think about all that incredible labor, like how many hands are actually needed. And it's not just the release manager or the core team, but like the sheer number of hands that are involved into keeping the language alive, keeping our community thriving, contributing in many, 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 many ways, big, small contributions, is incredible. So if you ever think that you don't have enough to contribute with, or you don't have X skills or Y skills, there is a ridiculous amount of ways in which you can do a little bit. I think that is my takeaway, or what I would like people to think about.
And that's a wonderful thing. The world
We
could
also
always
can
use
do
more.
with more donations and the PSF. Always more donations and sponsorship.
You've got the Square reader right now and you'll take credit cards. Awesome. But you're certainly right. The world could use a lot more appreciation. Let's give gratitude to people who've earned it. Lukasz, what's one takeaway that you want for people?
Dear users, do weird things with Python. Every year we have some trend for Python. Like Paul, we both remember when Zope was essentially synonymous to Python. Like nobody knows what Zope is now. Essentially, of all those people who actually fill out the survey, there's a very small percentage that could actually tell you what that software was doing. Python can be anything that you want.
I'll book an appointment with my therapist. Thanks, Lukasz, for bringing that up.
All I'm saying is that all the changes that we are making in core, with the JIT being usable soon, with a global interpreter log becoming optional even now for framework authors, library authors, the most exciting thing for me about those is not how they can help existing use cases, but that they might uncover use cases that we have never thought about before. Because clearly Python was not a good choice for those sorts of things, and now it might become one. So try it out. Try something weird with Python. I personally try to do that, and you know, I get tremendous joy out of every such experience.
Wonderful statement. Sometimes it feels like as much as we're all freaked out at Python being basically #1, the golden age might still be in front of us. I mean, this stuff is major that's happening right now. Jodie, what's one takeaway that you have for people?
Yeah, I kind of want to riff on what Tania said about getting involved. So, look, getting involved in open source, anything like that, is extremely intimidating. But there's actually a lot of community support for things like this. So, there's mentored sprints. There are, say, PyLadies events where I live in Berlin, where people will actually take you through and show you how to create your first issues. So, if you really want to like contribute back to Python in a hands-on way, if this has inspired you to get hands-on, there are definitely people who can help you. And another kind of beautiful reflection of the Python community, people are so generous with their time because we all love Python. Python is
Indeed.
love.
Indeed. For me, I've reached the age where I've decided I'm in the joy business. And this is all such joyful, the people, the language, everything. And so let's all have fun. And like Tania said, let's all appreciate each other, let people know that they're wanted and valued. Thank you very much, Tania and Lukasz and the PSF for appearing today. Not just for appearing, but also for all that you do for all of us out here in the world of Python. And for the Python Software Foundation, a wonderful achievement that we should all be proud of and celebrate everything that it does. That's it for today. Thank you to all the lovely and obviously talented and smart people who showed up for the live stream and gave comments for us today. And on to Python 3.14.